Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. The topic of today is birds in snow leopard habitats, and my name is Yuhan from Shanshui Conservation Center. So today we are very pleased to have our two great friends of Snow Leopard Network, John McKinnon, distinguished author of a field guide to the birds of China. And he, oh, okay, is that a tiger? That's not a snow leopard, right?
Nor is the snow leopard a leopard.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
And another guest speaker is Terry Tangshen. He's a very well-known birder in China and also old friends of our Snow Leopard Network. He and John will lead the session today. So both of them have been to the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau for many, many times. And today they will give us more than bird's eye view on this interesting look at snow leopard conservation. So again, the webinar today is recorded. And if you have any questions, please type in the comment section and we'll get to them after the talk. So John, I think I will hand over the floor to you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm in England, of course. And yeah, Terry and I have been separately and together various times to the plateau, and I've been to quite a few other parts of the leopard range. And we're going to talk about birds mostly. We could tell you about leopards, but you know about them already. So we'll tell you more about the birds and their relationship with leopards, the snow leopards, and how snow leopard conservation and bird conservation can help each other and help understand each other. Next. Okay, well, you all know the distribution of the snow leopard, but basically it's the Tibetan Plateau, the Himalayas, the Tian Shan range, and then the Altai Shan extending up into the lakes around Baikal Lake in Russia. Next. But there are three subspecies recognized. There may be more, but basically Urbis in the north and Unsir on the west, and Unsioides on the plateau. And as a birder, I'm immediately struck by that distribution, and it just matches more or less exactly the distribution of snowcocks. So we have three species of snowcocks, but the same pattern of distribution, which suggests that the paleoclimate that resulted in the separations and then connections between these species may be the same, and that to understand the paleoclimate and why there are three subspecies of snow leopard, maybe you should sometimes look at birds. Next. Of course, connectivity between mountain blocks varies with altitude. The snow leopard currently lives, well, in the south above 3,000 meters. It goes down to 600 meters in the very north, but below about 3,000, you've also got things like tragopans. And here you see speciation along the Himalayas, which is not reflected in snow leopards. So it depends what elevation range, what habitat types you're looking at to try and understand the former evolution and connectivities that have occurred. But it's well worth looking at birds to interpret what we're seeing in snow leopards. Next. Well, snow leopards are kind of difficult to see. You probably spend an awful lot of time wandering around in high altitudes and remote places looking for them and not seeing them. So why not look at the birds? So these are some of the birds maybe you might look out for. These are groups of birds that are really present in remote and high altitude and mountainous places, and these are the bird groups that are really share habitat with the snow leopard. Of course, the pheasants, the crows, the rosefinches, etc. I'm going to go through these groups sort of one by one. Next. So the accentors, which Europeans at least will think of as the dunnocks, there are several species and they're quite prominent. And snow finches are also very prominent small birds on the plateau. The bottom right hand, two of those are snow finches. So we see a lot of those. Next. There are tits, of course. Tits get everywhere. The top right corner is white-browed tit. This is a bit of a specialist in the habitat of snow leopard, high altitude specialist. The bottom left is a sort of a Sichuan tit. There's a whole bunch of tits, sort of marsh tit type things, marsh tit, willow tit group. The bottom right is rather cute. This is the tit warblers. There's two species of those. This is the white-browed tit warbler. They're just gorgeous, beautiful colored things. The thing on the top left, I hate to call a tit. It used to be called Hume's ground pecker, but it's called a giant ground tit or something now. It really isn't. Tit in English means tiny, and this is not tiny. This is quite a big bird. It lives in piker holes, and it's very prominent on the plateau, a lot of snow leopard habitat. Next. Okay, now this is more relevant, I guess, because raptors are very involved in the snow leopard business. Some of these join and compete for and fight over the carcasses of the snow leopard kills. And so there's two eagles in the right-hand corner, and then buzzards and maybe the Sacred falcon. They actually prey on small animals like well, even marmots and hares and pikers and birds, game birds, and so they're a sort of competitor with the snow leopard. I think Terry's going to talk a bit more about the vultures. The kite is a sort of scavenger that comes in seasonally. It's not there all the year. The goshawk is the sort of dominant bird as soon as you come down into vegetated, forested or woodland habitats. Next. Okay, pheasants. From Central Asia into China is really the radiation center for pheasants as a group. And there are many genera and many species. China has more species than anywhere else in the world. There's sort of two distinct groups. So in the north, you've got European, the sort of Palearctic northern pheasants. You get things like these I took in the Altai, the ptarmigan in the middle center, the white one, and the half white thing on the top right is a willow grouse. Those are they overlap with snow leopards in the north. On the Tibetan Plateau, you get a sort of different bunch. Those ones aren't there. You've got the snow cocks, bottom left, snow pigeon, snow partridge, the eared pheasants. There are 3 eared pheasants that overlap with snow leopards, and then the little Tibetan partridge is very, very common. A thing that interests me is that in the northern latitudes, whether in America or Europe, you get a lot of species that go white in winter, like the ptarmigan there and the willow grouse also, but hares and weasels and goats go white. On the Tibetan Plateau, nothing goes white in winter. I think it's maybe because the Tibetan Plateau is very recent. It's a fairly new thing, and the species haven't learned to go white yet. Next. Well, a very characteristic group, and may dazzle you because they dazzle me actually. The Rosefinches, because there's about 20 species of them. And basically, the males are pink and the females are brown, and they're very similar. Of course, the songs are not so similar. You probably can recognize the two on the left with the very bold white brow, especially the back of the brow is white. That's the female at the bottom and the male at the top. The bird on the top right is the common rosefinch, which is very common, and you'll hear it call all the time. But on the plateau, at least, it only seems to be there in the summer. It goes further down in the valleys in the winter. But some of the other ones are out in the winter in the snow. They find the seeds all through the winter. So this is a very lovely group of birds, but very difficult to identify some of them. Next. All right, the crows are very obvious and prominent in the Tibetan Plateau and the whole snow leopard distribution. carrion crow is in the valleys, but on the plateau itself, the raven is more common. That's the middle upper bird, very big crow. Smaller crows are like the Darien jackdaws and the magpies, the black and white ones. And then at the ends, for some reason, I put the red-billed chough on one end and the yellow-billed chough at the other. These are alpine specialists and form big flocks and are very obvious all over the distribution of snow leopards. Next. Is this a video? Yeah. Is it? Does it play? Yes. This is a very rare bird with a very small distribution, but entirely overlapping the habitat of the snow leopard, and it happens to be not so rare in the Angsai area that Terry and I most frequently visit. At the other extreme, the Gotliuski's bunting is probably the commonest bunting, and we see that all over the place, and it's a bit of a distraction. Next. Let's come back for more. There are a bunch of Redstarts. I guess the black Redstart and the blue-fronted Redstart are very common, and then the one with the big white wing flash is white-winged Redstart, and the river Redstart, and with it the source of Columbus Redstart, live along all their streams, going right up into quite high altitude. These are very obvious birds in the habitats of snow leopard, and rather fun and very colorful. Next. Well, of course, in the summer, the habitat of the snow leopard is hot, at least in the daytime. It might get very cold at night, and the plateau is green and snow free and full of life, and so are the mountain ranges, except for the highest peaks. So a lot of seasonal migrants come to breed. In the north, you have long day lengths. On the plateau, you don't, but you have got a concentration of insect emergence and life available in the summer months for birds to feed on. So you get a whole lot of things. I mentioned the kite earlier, but the swifts arrive, and the larks come in to breed. Some of the Redstarts are migratory. The martins, the cuckoo, which Terry will talk about a bit later, you get on the lakes. There are a lot of lakes, intermontane lakes and plateau lakes with a lot of waterfowl, cranes, and there's a grebe there in terns, bar-winged geese, etc. Okay, next.
Do you want me to take over now, John?
No, but you do. What's up now?
Okay, well, thank you, John, and hello to everyone, and thank you to the Snow Leopard Network for organising this webinar today, and it's an honour for me to share this with John, who is for many years been working in China and probably knows China's wildlife probably better than anyone, and obviously wrote the field guide to the birds of China, which has infused millions of Chinese birders. I think I can say millions now. So it's a great pleasure for me to have spent time on the plateau with John, and to have shared so many experiences. So John has outlined a lot of the birds that are resident on the plateau in snow leopard habitats, and talked briefly about some of the migrants too. And of course, a lot of these migrants that come up to the plateau for summer to take advantage of this insect explosion, this protein-rich food, which makes it worth their while to migrate there to raise their young. They can raise probably more young and more quickly than if they stayed in their wintering grounds. So how do they get up to the plateau? And actually the migration is pretty poorly known for many of these migratory species. But there is some evidence that some of the birds at least use the river corridors as migratory routes. So a lot of them run north-south. You can see on this slide, from a China perspective, you have the Yangtze, the Mekong, and the Salween, which is, and also the yellow and the coming east from north of the plateau. And then you have the Irrawaddy, the Brahmaputra, right round to the Ganges and the Indus on the west. And something like the Mekong descends very quickly from the high plateau to low elevations in Yunnan, and then through into Laos, Thailand, and so on. And so a lot of these birds make use of these corridors to migrate from lower elevations to higher elevations and back. And generally these birds will go to warmer climates in winter. So generally in a south direction. Although it is sometimes the case that in winter in Beijing, we see some of the Redstarts and high elevation birds from the plateau occasionally come east. So in many cases, it's an altitudinal migration rather than a latitudinal migration. So some birds will disperse east and west. So these migratory birds actually link snow leopard habitats with other ecosystems, with other countries, and probably even other continents. So we've talked about the short distance altitudinal migrants. Many of those, things like rosefinches and snowfinches and some of the redstarts, will really not go very far in winter. Some of them will remain at high elevations. Others will just go down maybe 1,000 to 2,000 meters or some more. But very much altitudinal migrants. There are some medium distance migrants. So things like geese and cranes, skylarks, and some of the other redstarts will leave the plateau completely. And of course, one of the most famous is probably the bar-headed goose, which has been recorded, I believe, at about 9,000 meters flying over the Himalayas. So most of the bar-headed geese winter in India, a few go into China, and they've been recorded at very high elevations by pilots in aircraft. So they're a very, very well-adapted species. And then there are some longer distance migrants, we think. So this hasn't been proved yet, but we think there are species that will link snow leopard habitats in the Himalayas to other continents. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of those possibilities. So one of the birds that is very well known, I think everybody will know the common cuckoo. Its distribution goes right across Eurasia, from Britain in the west right across to Japan and far northeast Siberia. And we know that the cuckoos in the west, in Europe, winter in Africa, and we know also that the cuckoos in East Asia winter in Africa. And what's interesting is that we know from tracking projects in Beijing and Mongolia that the route the cuckoos take to get to their wintering grounds in Africa, they take quite a long route to avoid the Himalayas. As you can see with these tracks, they go south of the Himalayas into India and then cross the Indian Ocean to Africa. And of course, why do they do that? You know, you might think, well, it's a lot of extra distance, but of course, if you're migrating over very high elevations, the air pressure is much lower and it requires more energy to get lift. And so these birds have obviously calculated that it's better for them to, well, they've evolutionarily calculated this, that it's better for them to take this route around the Himalayas and not to go up to high elevations. And yet, if you go to the Tibetan Plateau in summer, you will find lots of cuckoos. And there's a subspecies called Subtelephonus, which is the subspecies that's found on the plateau. And this is the only subspecies of cuckoo across Eurasia that has not been tracked or well studied. So it's very, very poorly studied. We don't know where it goes for the winter or how it gets there. And so having tracked cuckoos from East Asia, the next step, we hope to be able to track cuckoos from the Tibetan Plateau. And of course, the hope and expectation is that these cuckoos will also go to Africa, but exactly where in Africa and how they get there remains to be discovered. And the idea is that to celebrate China forming its national park system, that these cuckoos could link Zhanjiangyuan, which is China's first and biggest national park, with national parks in Africa. So we're pretty certain they'll go to Africa. We're pretty certain they'll pass through or winter in national parks in Africa. And so this offers an opportunity to link Zhanjiangyuan with African national parks. Potentially local communities in Tibet can give, in Qinghai, can give these birds names and follow them all the way to Africa. We could twin the national parks, we can twin communities through migratory birds. And of course, these cuckoos in Zhanjiangyuan will, in summer, they'll be mixing with snow leopards and bears and wolves, and in winter they'll be with lions and elephants and giraffes. So there's a great storytelling potential there as well for this project. And we've had to delay this project due to COVID, but we're very hopeful that we'll be able to do it next year. So watch this space for cuckoos. And then the other bird that potentially is an intercontinental link between snow leopard habitats and other continents is the Salim Ali's swift. And so this swift formerly was considered conspecific with three others: the Pacific swift, the Cook swift, and the Blythe swift, and is recently given species status. And it is very, very poorly known. So we know that they breed on the plateau, and they actually breed in Angsai, in caves, and then they disappear, and we have no idea where they go for the winter. Now, one of the species with which it was considered conspecific before, the Pacific swift, we know winters in Australia. So it is possible that this swift could go to Australia. I mean, it could go to Africa. It could stay more local, perhaps in India, but we just don't know. And so this is another potential mystery that we can hopefully solve using new technology like geolocators, which swifts can carry. So potentially this is another bird that can link snow leopard with another continent. And then just to sort of illustrate really how poorly known a lot of these birds are on the Tibetan Plateau, the Salim's mountain finch, I think it's now a Rosefinch, John will be able to confirm that. But this bird was known only from two specimens collected in the 1920s from a very high altitude area in Xinjiang. And they were not identified until the 1990s. So these sat in a drawer with other mountain finches for decades. And it was only when a researcher from the University of Amsterdam was looking through this drawer and noticed that there were two different, that they were discovered and just first described as a new species. And they weren't seen from 1929 in the wild until June 2012, when a French birder and hiker called Jan Musica, he was on a hiking expedition in Qinghai in Wild Yak Valley. And he was camping, and he was feeling pretty sick because of the altitude. And so he stayed in his tent pretty much all day. And then sort of late in the afternoon, when he was feeling well enough to venture out, opened the tent, and there were a couple of birds pottering around, and he took pictures. Didn't recognize what they were. And it was only on his return that he sent them to a few people, experts on Asian birds, who sort of raised the alarm. This was the Salim's mountain finch, which hasn't been seen since 1929. And the last few years, birders have gone there and found these birds in a similar location, but it seems that their distribution is really narrowly defined, and they could be spread out further. Obviously, there's a vast area, and a lot of it is very hard to get to, but a really poorly known bird on the plateau. And so just to take you to Angsai and Qinghai, Valley of the Cats, I think most of people on this call will know about the community-based wildlife tourism project there. And many of the people that have come to visit to look for snow leopard have also been birders. And it's clear that the presence of many range-restricted species in this area adds value to the tourism there. So overall, so far, 103 species of bird have been recorded. 46 are resident species, and the remainder are migratory. And in the area includes some of the birds that John spoke about: Tibetan bunting, Tibetan babbacks, ibis bill is always a favorite, Tibetan snowcock. These are difficult birds to see worldwide, and so much sought after by birders. And through birders visiting, this has also increased knowledge among the local people about the birds, the diversity of birds that are in this habitat, that share the habitat with these predators. So I want to talk a bit about specifically the relationship between snow leopards and birds. And there are perhaps two families that have the most direct relationship, the vultures and the corvids, or the crows. And both of these are dependent on snow leopard and other predators for carcasses. So these two actually also influence snow leopard behavior. So when a snow leopard makes a kill, it needs to stay with that kill and defend it, because if it doesn't, vultures and other birds will come in and take the meat. And then there's also field signs. So if you're looking for a snow leopard, one of the things to look for is alarm calling birds, such as particularly magpies, but also marmots in summer. So if you hear marmots calling, or if you hear magpies calling, it's a good idea to have a look, see where they're looking and what they're looking at, because often they can give away the presence of a snow leopard. And similarly, obviously, a congregation of vultures also can give up the location of a kill, a recent kill. And so this is, I've got a little video here of a marmot just giving an alarm call. So what he's saying in marmot language is snow leopard. And so if you get 2 or 3 marmots in different places calling, you can sort of triangulate by seeing what the direction they're looking, and potentially find the spot that they're looking at, and focus your search on there. And it could be a wolf, it could be a snow leopard, it could be a dog, but it's a good thing to look out for. And so vultures in the Angsai area and most of the plateau have two vulture species that are dominant. One is the Himalayan griffon vulture, and the other is the bearded vulture. Now, the Himalayan griffon, the one on the left here with the sort of bald head, these have a wingspan of up to 3 meters, and they only eat dead things. So they're scavengers, and they play a really important role in the ecosystem, removing and processing carrion. About 64% of their diet is obtained from dead domestic yak. And they're often the first responder to kills by predators. And you can see that very sharp bill they have, which enables them to rip open flesh and to eat the meat. And they can strip a carcass pretty fast. On the right, we have the bearded vulture, which you could describe as a dustbin. They have a wingspan of almost 3 meters. And about 70 to 90% of their diet is bones. So they consume not just the marrow from inside bones, but they can actually consume entire bones. Small ones they can eat whole, and then the large ones they carry away and drop from a great height onto rocks to break open so they can access the marrow. And they have very acidic gastric juices and long intestinal tracts that enable them to digest these bones. And this video, next video, shows a group of Himalayan griffon vultures tearing into a roadkill horse. And you can see how quickly a group of vultures can strip a carcass. So it's estimated that in a large group, vultures can strip a human or sheep carcass in about 30 minutes. And they can do the same to a yak carcass in about 2 hours. So you can see why, if a snow leopard makes a kill, it really needs to stay close and defend it, because if it leaves it for any length of time, vultures can really strip that carcass of meat. And then this is just a little video of, like we all, in Europe and America, I know one of our favorite pastimes is feeding the garden birds. And so this is a Tibetan family feeding their garden birds. I don't think it's granny that they're feeding to the vultures. I think it's actually a yak skin. They're just taking morsels of and feeding it. So, and then the second family after the vultures that really have a direct relationship with snow leopards are the corvids. And certainly in the Angsai area, the Valley of the Cats, we have 4 species there: the raven, the large-billed crow, carrion crow, and the black-rumped magpie. Dorian jackdaw is also there, but much less of a scavenger. So these are the ones that you're likely to see around a snow leopard carcass. Corvids don't have the hooked bills to be able to break open flesh, so they have to wait for the vultures to do that for them, to open the carcass and make the meat more accessible. And there have actually been cases of ravens calling wolves to the site of dead animals. So where dead animals have, whether they've died naturally or been killed by predators, if they haven't yet been opened up, it has been known for corvids to lead wolves to a carcass so that they feed on it and open it up, make it more accessible for the corvids. Ravens and magpies are all omnivorous, so they can eat a variety of things. They're very intelligent, quite long-lived also. Ravens can live up to 40 years. So yes, they're the sort of second responders, if you like. And then this video, just to illustrate all the different scavengers here, we have Himalayan griffons on the right-hand side. They're feeding on the meat. You have ravens and large-billed crows. And then this bearded vulture comes in and takes a bone. So this sort of shows how it all works. You get the Himalayan griffons feeding on the main meat. You have the corvids hanging around waiting for opportunistically to snatch what they can. And then the bearded vulture comes in later when a lot of the meat has been stripped and the bones are exposed, and we'll take the bones. Now, corvids, especially magpies, seem to really annoy snow leopards. I don't know if you can see the snow leopard in this picture. It's not easy, but I'll zoom in. And you can see here, this snow leopard is looking at this magpie. So the snow leopard is on a kill, and the magpie is hanging around waiting for an opportunity. And a few times in Angsai, in the Valley of the Cats, we've seen snow leopards interacting with magpies. So this video, again, is a snow leopard on a fresh kill of a young yak. And you can see the magpies trying to get close. And you can see how the snow leopard really pays attention to the magpie and doesn't like them being around. So I think magpies are really annoying to snow leopards. So I think that's where I'll hand back to John, and John will talk a bit more about some of the broader ecosystem dependencies. So over to you, John. I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. I'm unmuted. Broader ecosystem dependencies. Of course, I think if you just study snow leopards and you focus too much on the snow leopard, you get a restricted view. You have to really look at the entire ecosystem. The snow leopards are entirely dependent on their prey. Their prey are entirely dependent on the vegetation, etc. And it's the bio-rich ecosystems with a lot of species present that seem to be the best for snow leopards. And we have various dependencies, for instance, these pikers, which the agriculturalists hate and are trying to poison all over their range in China, actually make holes in the ground, which aerates the ground, allows water to penetrate the ground, but provides shelter for snakes and owls and ground tits and many other species are dependent on this. So if you kill all these pikers, which also snow leopards eat pikers, and so does everybody else, all the raptors and foxes and stuff depend on pikers. You are reducing the whole ecosystem. And then the grazers maintain grass in certain conditions, which provides the seeds that a whole lot of pheasants, buntings, and whatnot depend on, and the insects. If there weren't the grazers there, then scrub bushes would grow everywhere, and the whole ecosystem would be very different. To preserve snow leopards, we need to preserve the whole ecosystem, and you need to look at the birds and small mammals. Okay, next. And then we have the people. Of course, I think everywhere the snow leopard occurs, there are also people, and they're trying to raise animals, nomads or settled herdsmen now, increasingly settled and putting up fences everywhere. This changes the opportunities. Actually, we've filmed snow leopards using fences as a sort of trap to ambush blue sheep and things. They're very clever. Drive sheep towards fences and as well as steep crags. How the local people behave is absolutely vital. Angsa is one example where the local people have been won over to benefit through tourism, often bird tourists, and live with and accept the snow leopard. But in other areas, if you're dependent on yaks and half of them get killed every year by snow leopards, of course, you're going to want to retaliate. So winning over the local people is very, very important. Next. I don't know what, well, this is what attracts the birders up there. This is a very rare bird. This is Terry's video of it in the snow. In the winter, in the summer, they nest up in scrub in the sort of alpine zone. In the winter, they come down a little bit into the valleys and form flocks. So you can actually see a dozen or so together. Next. Okay, there are big unknowns. I mean, Terry pointed out some of the unknowns in the bird life, but we have, can the farmers live with snow leopards? The farmers are being forced to create more money and therefore more domestic animals, and therefore there's competition with the wild animals and with snow leopards. Can we get them to coexist? And then we have this huge problem of climate change. The graph on the right shows the various models and predictions, but the worst case scenario, and the data indicate that we are following the worst case scenario at the moment, suggests we're going to get something like a 6-degree rise in temperature by the end of the century. Well, imagine that the temperatures on the plateau, as in the Arctic and the polar regions, are about double the global averages. So you worry about a 1.5 to 2 degree problem for most of us, but up there it's going to be like 5 or 6 degrees. That's going to profoundly change the distribution of vegetation and some of these animals. And the alpine habitats are going to be shrink and become isolated. This is going to be a big problem for snow leopards and their prey. Next. So we need to work with the local communities to protect snow leopards, but we also need to deal with climate change and cope. Snow leopards themselves probably could live way down, and in the north of their range they go down to 600 meters, but they need remote places where there's a lot of animals, prey animals to feed on, and the climate change is going to allow cultivation, agriculture, and herding to penetrate much higher up into the habitat of snow leopards. So that this is a big contradiction we have to sort out. But we need to sort it out to protect not just the snow leopard, but a whole range of very, very interesting animals. Next. So, well, just to emphasize the changing climate, the yak, which in the wild is now only found above 4,000 meters on the Tibetan Plateau, Changtang areas, used to occur at much lower altitudes. So the petroglyph I show you there, I photographed in part of Inner Mongolia at 1,500 meters. And it's about 5,000 years old. So the plateau is rising, and the animals that are on the plateau now were not there 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, the whole of the top of the plateau was covered in a glacier. So these animals are dynamic. They're dynamic distributions, and we often think, oh, it's all stable and static, but it isn't. There's a lot of problems with changing climate, and have been all through the Pleistocene. So we will move on to questions. I'll say thank you from Tom and Jerry, or John and Terry, as we sometimes call ourselves, and move on to Q&A. I think Johan is going to coordinate that. Are you?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, I was going to plug my book as well.
You want to plug your book? There you go.
Yes, I wanted to plug my book. There's a new.
Please.
You can't identify any of these birds, of course, until you buy the new guide to the birds of China. This is the ordered form on Oxford University Press. The Chinese version. This will be one volume. The Chinese version is in 2 volumes. Will be published by Commercial Press. It's in 2 volumes because Chinese always tear my book in half and take the plates and maps in the field and leave the text at home. So we decided to make it easier for them and print it in 2 volumes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John and Terry, for this wonderful presentation. It's always fascinating to get to know these birds and also explore their relationship with other species, such as the snow leopard and also the pikas on the plateau. So now is our Q&A session. And I noticed that there are already some questions from the chat box. The first one is from Dale. Dale is also among the first visitors to the Valley of the Cats. So Dale, would you like to expand your question a little bit?
Yeah, John, you had said something about radiation and birds not having enough time to develop the 2 plumages, the winter-summer plumage. I kind of missed that as you skimmed over it. Do you mind going back to that?
Well, in the northern latitudes, several groups, I mean unrelated groups, have found that it's beneficial to have a white form in the winter, in the snowy months, whether it's mustelids or goat family or hares or pheasants, and yet you don't find any of these forms on the Tibetan Plateau, which is equally cold and snowy. And I sort of have wondered why. Well, one possible reason is that the Tibetan Plateau has been rising gradually for about 10 million years, but actually it's only in the last sort of 2 or 3 million years that it's been going up it's been accelerating. It's been going up to very high elevations. I think maybe the species haven't been there long enough, and the plateau hasn't been that high for long enough for all these evolutionary processes to take place.
I find that really interesting, because the Tibetan Plateau seems to have such a huge avian diversity compared to many other mountain regions on the planet. Look at the Alps, and I live in the Alps, and I go walking around the mountains, and I'm happy to see 3 species of bird. Whereas in Qinghai, we were exposed to like very different scales of species. There are 8 different snowfinch species compared to 1 here.
Yeah, well, you saw the map of the plateau. A, it's huge, and B, you've got rivers coming up from all directions, so that the avenues for species to have colonized and utilized the plateau is enormous. And China itself is very rich because it never had, in the cold periods of the Pleistocene, it still had a warm subtropical zone. Somewhere like Europe didn't, and North America didn't. So this is one reason why East Asia is just a lot richer in a lot of these groups.
Fascinating. I'll need to dig into it more. I think that's really interesting. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And then we have Spike Millington, who has a couple of questions. So would you like to go over them one by one?
Sure, if I can remember them. The one is about the same subject, actually, that was just talked about. So you mentioned the grouse going white, but there are no grouse, are there, in the plateau? I think the grouse are at lower altitudes in China. And so I'm wondering also whether you think there's any greater predation risk because they're not white. I mean, is the whole area covered in a blanket of snow in the same way as that we know from the northern latitudes? Or the pictures of the snow leopards showed it sort of more broken, but maybe that wasn't taken in winter. And so, yeah, I'm really interested in that. And you know, your hypothesis that it's just so young, so if you wait a few thousand years, they're all going to turn white. Is that right?
Well, maybe a million years. I don't know. Yeah, but well, indeed. You know, in the north we have white ermine, the stoats go white, the hares go white. On the plateau they're not. So they do indeed. You see the hares standing out dark against the snow. Quite. I mean, that must be poor for their protection in winter. They can be spotted by eagles very easily.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I think there's another question that is for Terry on your plan about catching and ban cuckoos or swifts from the plateau. Would you like to give more details about this project?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, we've been, as you know, cuckoos have been tracked in Europe for many years now, and with British Trust for Ornithology. And I've worked with British Trust for Ornithology in East Asia to track the cuckoos there. And so all of the subspecies of common cuckoo across Eurasia have been tracked. Their migration has been tracked, except for the subtelephonous subspecies, which is a bit smaller than the nominate Cuculus canorus that we get in Britain and also in northern parts of East Asia. And so this subspecies is very poorly known, and the migration is completely unknown. We would expect it to go to Africa because the subspecies to the east and west both go to Africa. So we would expect the subtelephonous to winter in Africa as well, but it's highly likely that the wintering area within Africa will be different. So we know the cuckoos from Western Europe and East Asia winter in different parts of Africa. So it's likely that the subtelephonous subspecies will also winter in a different part of Africa. But of course, the route it takes to get there will be very interesting to find out. You know, does it follow one of the river valleys up to the plateau as we suspect, or will it take a different route? And and I think what's really interesting about a project like this is that we can combine that scientific discovery element with public engagement in terms of this storytelling and linking national parks in China with national parks in Africa, linking communities, twinning the national parks potentially, all to help raise awareness about biodiversity and national parks. So it's a very exciting project. We'll work with Shanshui Conservation Centre to implement this, and we've already spoken with the Qinghai government to get approval there, the National Parks Authority. So it's a very exciting project. And I think we can involve the local people so they can learn about where some of their birds are coming from that are visiting them in the summer, where they're going. And I think all of this will help to generate more appreciation for biodiversity and hopefully more support for policies to protect it as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Terry. And there's a question about whether local people is surprised to see foreigners coming to on-site, seeing birds. So what was your impression of that? I think that's a question both to Terry and John.
Maybe I'll go first quickly. I think certainly when we first started working with the local community there was some awareness about some of the birds, and perhaps not surprisingly, the big birds, the vultures, the eagles, the pheasants, and so on. But a lot of the smaller birds, like the buntings and the rosefinches and the redstarts, they were not so familiar with. So I think, birders having come there and wanting to see certain species, has helped to build their knowledge and give them a greater awareness also of the value of the place where they live and the biodiversity that they have around them. Of course, when you live somewhere, and it's all you take everything for granted. And so I think having people coming there and expressing their appreciation and love for some of the birds that they have around them, I think gives the local people an extra element of pride about their environment. So, and I think they learn very quickly as well. I know some of the guides there are now, can tell you the names of a lot of the rosefinches and redstarts and buntings. So, some of them are really, really learning fast. And of course, there's the guidebook that Shanshui has given to each of the families there, which has it's a field guide to the wildlife in Sanjiangyuan. So it covers mammals, birds, and also insects and reptiles and flowers as well. So that is a really, really great resource to enable the local people to learn and also to show visitors when they come, what they're looking at. John.
Right. I guess Shanshui should also get copies of John's new book to the host families so that they are
send 3 copies to you.
Yeah, please, John.
Well, as soon as you've translated it into Tibetan, we'll ship you some. Yeah, I think the Tibetans are very pragmatic, and you think, oh, they've been doing these customary behavior for thousands of years. Probably not thousands, it's probably a couple of 200 or 300 years, and they're very fast changing. So the way they practice their religion is changing, the music is changing, they've got motorbikes, the way they're collecting new sources of income, like collecting all these medicinal plants and selling winter worms and things. This is all new. You see them all gathering and on little places with their cell phones to get a connection, to get a 4G connection or whatever. They just learn. So if they're not fazed by new things from the outer world, and if people want to come and look at their birds, they learn very, very quickly that this is yet another way to make a bit of money.
All right, thank you. And here's a question regarding wildlife traps still available to visit in the plateau freely under COVID. So I think the situation is changing all the time. And currently wildlife traps in the Valley of the Cats are available. And there is a new website we'll be working, I guess, in August. So if you're interested in coming to the Valley of the Cats, you can register through the websites. And that's the question regarding the trip. And the next one.
So Johan, I was just going to add to that, that if foreigners based in China can now visit the Valley of the Cats, provided they have a negative COVID test, I think within 7 days of arrival. But obviously from outside China, it's not possible right now.
Yeah. I think there are many restrictions about like how foreigners can enter China today. And we have another question from Hashim. How does scavenger get aware of dead animals or found the carcass? Sorry. Who would like to answer that question? Maybe Terry?
Well, John may know this better than me, actually. I mean, I think they have an extremely strong sense of smell, right? So, I mean, it's incredible how fast vultures are present on the site of a kill. So, I've witnessed that in the Valley of the Cats a couple of times, where you'll just see a swarm of vultures coming from literally miles away, all heading to one single point, from all directions. And you think, how on earth do they know that something has happened there? And I think it must just be an incredibly keen sense of smell. I mean, I'm not sure actually of the science behind it. Maybe John knows a bit more. But what I can say is that they are incredibly fast and effective at finding dead bodies.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much. I think maybe close range smell maybe have something, but it's their eyesight. I mean, they can see what's going on from thousands of feet up in the air, and there are vultures. There are layers of them that you can't see, but they can see the next layer down and the next layer down. I've seen vultures following snow leopards before there's a kill. I mean, they know that there's a good chance that if they can recognize this snow leopard is hunting, then they'll circle around waiting to be first in the queue. And then other scavengers like wolves and bears and magpies, of course, also are aware of and can see and hear the vultures and will home in very quickly, which is why the snow leopard has to eat very, very fast. I mean, one snow leopard I watched waiting for it to come out after a kill. It never came out. It finished a sheep, and we were left with the skin and the sort of the limbings and about 150 magpies milling around there, and the leopard kept chasing the magpies away. But the speed with which these carcasses are removed, in the case of a yak, I saw a snow leopard sit for 3 days beside a yak to make sure that nobody else got to it, because that's a big precious food source it didn't want to lose.
All right, thank you. And we're mindful of our time, and we have one last question, and that is, how can bird conservation contribute to peace building in the area and help to ease the tension between China and India?
Well, it's a wonderful idea. I mean, it's probably as good as cricket. If the Chinese learned to play cricket, we could arrange some beautiful cricket matches along the border, instead of clubbing matches. And but if they have got binoculars. If we got them all interested in birds and had events and bird races and competitions, and they hosted tourism. I think you could use bird interest as a way of alleviating the border zones. But making trans-frontier nature reserves is also a very good way. Peace parks and things of that nature. I don't know why these two countries are jealously willing to fight and die for little scraps of land which don't really hold many minerals and are useless agriculturally. But anyway.
I think, I mean, just to add to that, I think increasingly conservation is having to take an ecosystem approach, and that obviously means a cross-border approach. Nature doesn't respect our sort of artificial political boundaries. So, increasingly, if we're going to be successful at conservation, we need to be working, collaborating across borders. And I think a good example of that is the East Asia Australasian Flyway Partnership for the migratory shorebirds, where there's 22 countries working together, because there's a realization that there's no point in protecting the breeding grounds if you don't also protect the migratory stopover sites and the wintering grounds. And so migratory birds, that's a very, very clear rationale for collaboration. I think increasingly these snow leopards I'm sure there are many snow leopards that have territories that straddle borders, and and other animals as well. So increasingly I think biodiversity is going to become more of a foreign policy issue, especially as we get into a new biodiversity agreement, hopefully at COP15, and it comes up the agenda, and the risks of biodiversity loss become more apparent to policymakers, which are huge, on a par with climate change, probably, maybe even more. Then I think we're going to see biodiversity really climbing up the political agenda and becoming a key part of bilateral and multilateral foreign policy and diplomacy. So I think we'll see more of that in future, and hopefully that will help to take the sting out of some of these cross-border conflicts that we see around the world.
Oh, this is indeed a very important question, and hopefully the suggestions from Terry and John can become the reality.
I will comment on the border between
Please.
the border between Altai-Shan and Mongolia and Kazakhstan, and that is protected by sort of 3 triple rows of barbed wire high fence, and then razor wire. I mean, it's a fantastic fence. Trump would have bought a few hundred kilometers of that. You could have made an awful lot of money selling it to him. I can't imagine what the need for that fence is trying to stop. But I've got terrible photos of red deer tearing themselves to bits on those fences. The gazelle can't migrate, and moose doesn't come back anymore, and the beaver can't get down the rivers. It's something we have to work on. And the author of the Birds of Altai is the ex-head of security for the Altai region. And surely this guy has still got contacts with the current security and army and whatnot. And we could discuss opening up some of these big fences. You could use video monitoring, make sure that nobody is running backwards and forwards across the boundary. But we need to work closer with the army.
Yeah, thank you, John. All right, I think we are about time. Thank you everyone for joining the session, and big thank you to John and Terry for leading the session. The presentation is really, really wonderful, and also the Q&A session. I really enjoy it. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach us. And again, thank you everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you, Johan.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone,
for organizing and coordinating, etc., and inviting us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Johan, John, Terry. We'll be welcoming you guys back. Bye.
All right.
Tom and Jerry returns.
Tom and Jerry. I really like
A long-running series, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
that. Bye-bye.